Rural homes, many lacking modern home insulation, are in desperate need of government investment to help permanently bring down energy bills. Farmers in despair as trade deals have failed to deliver, and DEFRA struggles to implement its new payment schemes. And a local health service struggling to recruit the vital staff that my community needs to thrive. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm here in their service and to rebuild broken Britain, just as we promised we would do during the election. Thank you.
Zarah Sultana.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I first congratulate the Honourable Member for Penrith and Solway and everyone else who has made their maiden speech today and welcome you to your place here. I rise today with a heavy heart as we remember the 72 lives lost in the Grenfell Tower fire, an avoidable tragedy fuelled by systemic neglect, corporate greed and an ideology that prioritised profits over people. I begin by sharing the call of Grenfell United for the removal of flammable cladding from buildings now, for sprinklers, for the Hillsborough Law, for speedy criminal prosecutions of those whose negligence, greed and dishonesty killed 72 people. But there is something more here which I urge honourable members to understand. The Grenfell Next of Kin group call this report 10 kilograms of words on pages, rather than justice. The anger that Grenfell survivors have expressed is an anger that many of us feel, that in Britain today, working class people are treated as expendable. Less than a year before the fire, the Grenfell Action Group warned their dangerous living conditions would cause a catastrophic event, an incident that results in a serious loss of life. They predicted their own deaths because they knew how little anyone in power cared about keeping them alive. That is the inescapable conclusion of this report. Building firms engaged in systemic dishonesty, that's what the report says, to profit without ensuring safety. Some of them knew their insulation was, and I quote, a raging inferno, but they kept selling it anyway. After the earlier fires at Knowsley and Lakanal, after large-scale tests warned of the dangers of cladding, neither the British government nor Kensington and Chelsea Council came to help the residents of Grenfell. Then, after the fire, a former Secretary of State responsible for housing, Lord Pickles, loudly told the inquiry to not take up too much of his time. Nobody seriously thinks that the residents of London's wealthier streets would be so ignored, so derided, treated with contempt for decades and left to die. So let's tell the truth about the society we all live in. When 2 billionaires drowned on a submarine voyage to see the Titanic, powerful countries united in a global rescue effort. But when poor people and persecuted people drown in the English Channel or burn in Grenfell Tower, we do not mobilise every single resource to save their lives and bring them to safety. That is a kind of class war, a war on exploited and persecuted people wherever in the world they are born. Grenfell Tower was named after Sir Francis Grenfell, a general who carried out colonial violence from Ireland to Sudan to South Africa. When the British ruling class want cheap labour from places like those, it houses workers in an unsafe building named after a man who may have killed their ancestors and then ignores their warnings and leaves them to die. That was Grenfell Tower. Residents have spoken up beautifully in recent days of the community in the tower, how people stuck together and looked after the weakest amongst them. They share the working class values we all should, and they are entirely alien to the values that unfortunately rule in this society. The dead and the living deserve safe homes for all. They deserve corporate and state accountability and a different kind of society. Grenfell's 72 dead are forever in our hearts. Thank you.
I call Alex Ballinger to make his maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow so many excellent maiden speeches today, in particular the member for Penrith and Solway, which I'm sure is in definitely the top 5 of the most beautiful constituencies, rather than the top 10. I'm pleased to deliver my maiden speech today during this debate on building safety and resilience. After the tragic events at Grenfell Tower, the safety of our buildings has never been more important. Many residents in my constituency live in tower blocks, and they will be pleased to see the government taking practical steps to ensure that they can live in safety. I am honoured to have been elected to represent the people of Halesowen in Parliament. Thank you for putting your faith in me. However you voted, I am here to serve you. I would first like to thank my family, and in particular, my wife, Nida. You have been incredibly supportive and patient as I've gone through this campaign in my first weeks in the House. I'm also pleased to follow my predecessors, James Morris and Dame Sylvia Hill. James was the MP for Halesowen and Rowley Regis for 14 years. He was a hard-working constituency MP who championed mental health in Parliament and sought to protect the heritage of the town. He also sported a distinctive hairstyle, and he was affectionately known as Professor Snape in the constituency. Whilst we have our political differences, like the Harry Potter character, I think James was one of the good guys in the end. From 1997 to 2010, Halesowen and Rowley Regis was represented by Dame Sylvia Hill. A passionate campaigner for her constituents, Sylvia was easily recognised as she canvassed the streets of Halesowen in a bright red jacket. She also served 10 years as Deputy Speaker and has the dubious honour of being in the seat when, for the first time in 400 years, protesters stormed the floor of the Commons. The last time this happened, they were led by King Charles I, but unlike the 17th century, Sylvia restarted the debate after only 20 minutes and even allowed the protesters to escape with their heads. She was well loved by her constituents, and they still remember her fondly. Judging by the puzzled looks on many members' faces when I introduced my constituency, I think it's fair to say not everyone has heard of Halesowen. Well, Halesowen is a wonderful market town on the edge of the Black Country and includes the once influential Halesowen Abbey. In the 13th century, Halesowen was larger than Birmingham, and the Abbey ruled over lands as far as Wednesbury, Walsall, and Whalley. Whilst the Abbey's lands are now diminished, Halesowen remains a juggernaut in the West Midlands. And the whole constituency was at the very heart of the Industrial Revolution. Cradley Heath, Cradley, and Quarry Bank were the centres of chain making in the 19th century. But conditions for workers were terrible, and it was in Cradley Heath in 1910 that Mary MacArthur led women chain makers on a 10-week strike against starvation-level wages. Her campaign led to a doubling of women's pay and helped establish the principle of a minimum wage in the UK. Mary would later stand for Parliament in Stourbridge, and she nearly became the first woman to sit in the House of Commons. Mary MacArthur's campaigns for women's rights and better working conditions will be remembered this Sunday at the Women Chainmakers Festival in Cradley Heath. Newer to the constituency is the lovely green suburb of Woolliscote, which was home to the 19th century industrialist Ernest Stevens. Ernest made his fortune manufacturing kitchenware in Cradley Heath and donated several parks to the people of the area. Stevens Park in Woolliscote, Stevens Park in Quarry Bank, and Mary Stevens Park in Stourbridge. Ernest was well known for his philanthropy, if not his imagination. I mention Ernest Stevens because at the start of the century, my great-granddad was one of his drivers, and I like to imagine him travelling across the constituency, taking his boss to work each morning. But it's not just living in the same community where I followed in my ancestors' footsteps. My great-granddad, like generations after him, served his country overseas. Wilfrid Ballinger fought at the Somme in 1916 before being wounded by shrapnel and being evacuated back to Stourbridge. His son, Frank Ballinger, served in the Navy and managed to take part in the Italian campaign in 1944. And my dad, Robert Ballinger, spent 35 years in the Air Force, serving in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Iraq. So when both my brother and I followed in their footsteps and were sent to Afghanistan together in 2006, we felt like we were continuing the Ballinger family tradition. At the start of that tour, perhaps, I didn't realise the reality of conflict. But I was reminded during the election when I met Sue Crooks in Halesowen, the mother of Marine Jonathan Crooks. I didn't know John, but he was a Halesowen hero who served in Afghanistan and was tragically killed protecting his comrades. As someone who has served alongside brave servicemen and women like Jonathan Crooks, I want to use my time in this House to ensure we are doing everything we can to support our armed forces and the friends and family that they leave behind. When I left the Marines, I became an aid worker, helping deliver supplies into Syria and helping refugees rebuild their lives in neighbouring countries. And in what felt like full circle,